Good morning, everybody. Can everyone hear me okay? My name is Tim Packwood. My full job title is Technology Strategy Partner and Innovation Leader in IT Services. I understand that this is infrastructure focused in terms of some of the technology and some of the people in the room, but I actually come from the university's software and apps division. And the talk we're going to be talking about today won't be overly technical, I don't think, but it will be talking a little bit about the journey that we've been taking with PTS to develop our smart campus. Now, you might have seen some of the adverts from the University of Birmingham saying we want to be the smartest campus in the world. That is very much an ambition, but we are definitely not there yet, and we'll share some of that kind of honest story with you here today.
Hi, sorry, Tim, I wasn't listening to any of that.
That's okay, that's fine.
Stuff. Yeah. I'm Mark Perrett. I lead our higher education team at PTS Consulting, and we're going to talk about some of the work that we did together and some of the lessons learned. I won't go through all of this. I think the key thing in terms of what we do as independent consultants is we're the ones in between IT and estates. So where you talk very different languages and yet have shared ambitions, we're the ones that are hopefully bilingual and a little bit schizophrenic, dealing with the two teams and trying to move you forward. And when Birmingham came to us, they came jointly between IT and estates, which is rare to start off with a mission. So there was a very clear idea of what Smart Campus meant to them and what the benefits were, and a few ideas of where they wanted to go. But I think they just needed someone to, kick the tires with and help just point them in the right direction to say, actually, what are the priorities? What does it actually mean? And what's the direction of travel for all this? And I think I've said it a couple of times in some of the questions. You know, we're all here under the guise of Smart Campus, and I don't think anyone's got a unifying definition of what it is, and that's part of the challenge. But one of the ways, an analogy I like to give, which I think helps decode it a bit for me, is we've witnessed the digital transformation in our teams and in the consumer world over the last 10, 20 years. You know, there are loads of exemplars held up like Netflix or Uber or Tesla or even Tesco with online deliveries. And I think if you take the tenets of what they're doing, what they've effectively done is they've used digital to fundamentally disrupt the relationship between them and their customers by virtue of apps, mobile interface, data, real-time location. And what that does is it dramatically improves or completely changes the way that customers interact with them. So it's a better experience. But they have data that then informs them of how their customers are interacting with them to then improve that experience iteratively. And it's effectively that mindset, but it's infiltrating the physical estate by virtue of whether it's Internet of Things, sensor technology, integration. But it's data that's driven from the digital teams happening in the estate. So I almost say that Smart Campus is an IT project masquerading as an estates one. So I think the key thing was really, if we were to create a unified vision between the two teams, it's what does that look like and how we bring them both on the journey. And this visual is really just a visual representation of the very first thing we did, which was let's try and understand what it means in non-technical language. And we went through that approach. So they came with a vision. What does that user experience look like? And getting those out all on the table, because it's not always the same thing to different people. And then rolling our sleeves up and working out, well, what's the warts and all picture behind the scenes? And how do we take a hard-nosed view of the investments that are actually going to deliver value for money? Not all investments are worthwhile. Some of them end up being digital white elephants. I'm sure we've seen those in our universities. So it's what makes most sense, and how do we sequence that to get the best of our investment? And from that came the strategy. And I'll hand over to Tim now, because Tim's going to talk about how that strategy informed the next steps.
Thanks, Mark. I think what's really important is this title here, and if we can agree something today, it's that Smart Campus probably needs a rebrand, because I'm almost sick about talking about it. I think it's a loaded term at this point. But the increasingly smart campus is an important point, because becoming increasingly smart suggests that you don't understand where we came from. If I had an IQ of 10, but I then had an IQ of 40, I still might not be that smart, but I'm increasingly smarter than I previously was. The question we get asked, rather than talking esoterically about technology, data, IoT, event-driven architectures, is will our efforts result in decisions being made? We can do all of this stuff with technology, but does our governance structure allow us to make decisions quickly so we can use the data in a timely way? If I invest in IoT sensors across the institution that can give me 5-minute readings, but the institution makes its decisions in weeks and decades, what's the point of that? What's the disconnect between the technology and the culture? And this is the question that I always get asked. And my response to it, which is normally asked by the CIO at the University of Birmingham, is we have made decisions. We have made data-driven decisions based on the data we've been able to collect because of the partnership with PTS. And those decisions have resulted in things like the seasonal closure of buildings, the mothballing of buildings, the modulation of HVAC over Easter that saved us £20,000 in electricity. And because we are now looking at data differently, data that previously wasn't seen in the institution as that valuable, what we've actually done is save almost £1 million in energy by the end of this year based on some of these interventions. So everything we're going to talk about next, which is going to be about technology, has ultimately resulted in the university gaining something. I think the big thing also is that there's a diverse group of people at the university now know that there's more data available and are asking difficult questions, maturer questions about how they can utilize the data differently. I think what's really important, like Mark said, is it takes a village to build a smart campus, I think. What I mean by that is that you need so many bits of expertise. You need to work with so many different people who are digital by default, who work in digital teams that aren't necessarily in IT services. BMS teams, MIS teams, BIM teams, IT service teams, space teams, building managers, all of these are critical partners internally in building a smart campus. But I think what's also really critical is not thinking about this as something that you have to start from scratch on. We at the University of Birmingham, because we've rebuilt large sections of our campus in the last 10 years, now have a much smarter campus by default. We didn't aim to create a smart campus, but if you've refurbished spaces or built new buildings recently, what you've probably done is inject a lot of technology without really knowing about it, or actually really thinking about it in the context of using it for smart campus-based operations. The University of Birmingham has 40,000 occupancy sensors. I consider a Wi-Fi AP as an occupancy sensor, as well as smart lighting, smart door locks, smart security systems. We have over 10,000 environmental sensors that tell us how much heat we have, what the CO2 levels are. We have thousands of water meters telling us how much we consume, and we have hundreds of thousands of scheduled events in a timetable, in an attendance system, or in a room booking system. We didn't put any of that in because we wanted to build a smart campus. We put that in because we run a university. Our smart campus vision is not only about investing in things that will be smart by default and smart enabled, it's also about unlocking the work and the things that we already have. What PTS have done for us is they helped us draw the elephant, and that elephant looks like this. And then they also created a menu that helped us eat it and consume it. This is the utopian view of what a smart campus is from a kind of conceptual architecture point of view. On the right-hand side, we have all of the systems that make up a university. The blue ones are traditionally owned by estates, and the yellow ones are traditionally owned by two people, business owners being in the organization such as professional services and IT services. The blue tell us what happened in space. The yellow tell us what we think happened in space. And when we join those two things together and we invest in the things on the left side of the diagram, we're able to build the things in gold, which is ultimately what people care about. People care about butterflies. They do not care about caterpillars. So the hardest thing to do is to get the investment to build the thing in black, which is a very, very hard thing to do, and it's not something that we've completed at the University of Birmingham or will ever likely complete. I think what's really important, though, is to say from a technical architecture perspective, you are not starting from scratch. Whilst levels 1 and 2 here might be new, because you're starting to really think about the maturity of your edge devices, areas such as 3, 4, 5, and 6 are likely to be technologies that you already have in place. The University of Birmingham has done a couple of things in recent times. It's updated its HR and finance systems, and alongside doing that, it's updated its integration systems, and it's also updated its BI and data warehousing systems. And many of the technologies we've put in place to do that, we can now use to facilitate smart campus. Because effectively, it's using event-driven data to make event-driven decisions. And technically speaking, that's the same thing you're doing with multiple other business systems. Clearly, edge devices and IoT has a different security profile. I'm not saying it's completely the same, but I think it's important that we remind ourselves that we aren't always starting from nothing when it comes to trying to look at data in this context. We're trying to do lots of things, but ultimately what we're trying to do is we're trying to answer questions with data that derive insights that result in action. And we haven't done all of these, but the top 3 we've really started to focus on. So the reducing energy costs and energy use in general. We all have to become net zero. The University of Birmingham wants to be net zero by 2035 for Scope 1 and 2 emissions. We currently generate all of our own electricity using gas, and we'd likely have to move that to a decarbonised source. If we move to a decarbonised source, it's very unlikely to be as efficient as a carbon-based source in the near term, and we probably have to then reduce or make sure we're using energy more efficiently if we have any opportunity to make those targets. I think we can all agree that being net zero by 1 and 2 at a big university in 10 years is probably unrealistic. We're supporting sustainability and also improving the use of space. Lots of universities have got growth strategies when it comes to students, and I heard a university in London recently say, our responsibility is to make the campus smaller in order to be more sustainable, but improve the use of space at the same time. And that stuff is juxtaposed to each other. We have lots of data, so these are the kinds of data sets that we have. And ultimately, when these data sets are connected together, so you can ask questions of them independently or together, they do become greater than the sum of their parts. The ones at the bottom, again, are really around what you think you've used your space for. The ones at the top are actually telling you how you've used your space. Now, in order to make sense of this, all of this data, what you have to do is build something that everybody can understand, so decision makers can understand. And one of the things we've done is build a campus digital twin. Campus Digital Twin is a 3D model of our campus and several buildings that allow us to stream data to it within increments of about 5 minutes. We don't have all of our data streaming to it, but we have people, space per person, Wi-Fi devices, energy and water consumption for many, many, many of our buildings. And that gives us a perspective of our campus that we probably didn't have before. We would never have built this or thought about this as an important perspective if we haven't worked with PTS, who hadn't brought a lot of their experience from the commercial world and other institutions to build something that gave us such reasonable insights. I'll quickly go through what we can see with our digital twin. So we can see our energy profile on campus, which buildings are using the most energy. We can see the water profile of campus, and we can see the occupancy profile of campus, red being the most occupied. The diagram here is exam season, and red is the main library, because apparently it's the only space that we have on campus, and if it's full, students tell us that we don't offer them enough space, even though the rest of the place isn't necessarily as well utilized. But through that twin, we can also look at other spaces, so office spaces, lab spaces, teaching spaces, and commercial spaces, and we can really start to challenge some of the conventional thinking that's driving conversations at the institution. Institutions will always say we need more space. But when you start to look at the data, maybe the data tells you a different story. And through digital twins and the playbook and the information and the work with PTS, we were able to start to tell a slightly different story. Now, whether IT or data gets listened to is a separate set of challenges, and that's a culture piece over time. But what we can start to do with our data now is we can start to really challenge convention. This is the utilization, frequency, occupancy, and utilization of seminar rooms over a very busy period in the academic year. You cannot see the scale on the left-hand side, but the scale tops out at about 60%. Frequency is the number of slots booked out against the possible number of slots in a space. Occupancy is the attendance versus the capacity taken on attendance registers, and utilization is the frequency times the occupancy. Now, what you can see here is the vast majority of our large spaces, from a frequency perspective, are only used 60% of the time, and occupancy and utilization is much lower. Everyone also says they need new PC clusters, and that has a really interesting tale to tell, which is that in our context, they're used even less potentially. When they are used, they're significantly more occupied, but the utilization of them generally is much lower, suggesting that our students aren't asking or using this space as much as we think they are asking us and using this space. I think finally, what we're trying to do is we're trying to open up data in a secure way that allows anyone to ask a question. Trevor Payne, the Director of Estates at the University of Birmingham, he's about to move to Oxford. Is he still the Director of Estates? I think he is.
The next 5 hours.
A couple of days, yeah. The next 5 hours, that's true. He has lots of questions, and when we answer his questions with data, the only thing he does rightly is ask us more questions. So what we've been doing at the University of Birmingham is trying to open up that data. Now, it's impossible for us to think about all of the use cases for the use of this data. There are many, and I'm sure many people have discussed that. At the University of Birmingham, what we're trying to do is build our Smart Campus Data Gateway, so we can facilitate as many questions as possible in a safe and secure way. If we have a researcher, a student, a master's student, or a department with a new question, if we can organize our data in a coherent way, we can support innovation and we can crowdsource new ideas. I've mastered the 5-minute impressive presentation, I hope, but the reality is the scale and the challenge is much larger than that. It's very easy for me to stand up here and say, we've solved it all, but the reality is we haven't. We need to scale up access, we need to build long-term expertise, we need to focus on data quality and our stakeholders, because they have some role to play in that. And that ultimately we are trying to secure long-term funding to build a team that can focus on this the full time. But we hope we've saved £1 million in the last year. If we can invest a little bit more money, there's probably more money to be saved. Back to Mark.
So the time warnings over there are suggesting that I probably don't have enough time to go through what will become a very naff acrostic. It also means you're going to miss out on a really good Wallace and Gromit GIF. So unless the first question we get is, can we see the Wallace and Gromit GIF, I'll leave it on this slide. And this is probably the most important one from my perspective, which is that relationship between estates and IT. I mean, Tim and I, we talk an awful lot about, as complex as the data bit is and all of those diagrams is, from your perspective, that's the easy bit. The difficult bit is the cultural divide that is always the case between different departments, but in particular between IT and estates. And there are some really good case studies of where that's worked really well, and I use UCL as an example. But I see other institutions where it's still a real challenge. And I've always found it quite funny that we're all here from separate IT teams, and you collaborate on the whole better with each other between institutions than you do with your estates teams within the same institution. And I've been amazed at how quickly, when we've got past the technical conversations and we've spoken to both teams, how quickly it descends into couples therapy. It really is like say on a capital development, it's, oh, IT haven't made the decision at the right time, but you didn't invite us to come make the decision at the right time. And it's amazing that if you sort of recognize that and say, certain personalities aside, you are actually working towards the same objectives, you just come at it from completely different angles. You know, if I say to this audience, security or architecture, and I say that to an estates audience, you immediately think they're two different things. So if you understand there's a bit of a language barrier, there are different priorities, everyone's stressed, everyone's got, you know, their immediate, the immediate things they've got to worry about. But if you can extend an olive branch a little bit, I think care about some of the outcomes on the estate side, and not just see it as, you know, as this is what IT is focused on and this is what estates are focused on. It needs, I think, a fundamentally different model, a different target operating model for smart to work. But that won't happen without the cultural change that I think is necessary, because, you know, we've worked in technology for 40 years. The problem is still the same. The challenge is still the two teams. The technology is changing, but it is changing to a point where you are becoming intrinsically linked far more than you ever were. And if we're worried about, you know, cyber risks, you know, smart's going to you know, exacerbate that. So it's just fundamental that you're able to break down those barriers. And I won't say that we've solved that problem with every institution we've worked in. I don't think it's binary. I don't think it is a solvable problem. But you can move, you know, to your analogy, making a smarter campus, you can have a better relationship between the two teams. And that's going to unlock the most value, irrespective of some of the technical work that you do.
I think it's just recognising that both departments are foundational to the function and enhancement and advancement of the university. And I think both departments need to be more confident with their expertise and be more willing to share their expertise with the institution, because institutions have problems, some of the ones I highlighted, and they have people that can solve those problems, many of the people in this room and in our estates team, and those two conversations aren't connected. And I think with PTS and others, what they did was they came in as a referee to start with, probably, to help us kind of, to be that couples counsellor, Mark's, yeah, couples counsellor by evening. But it helped us realise that, you know, we have many of the same goals. They are just badged and talked about slightly differently. Of course, depending on how your capital programs are funded, IT would also argue that departments are funded differently. But I think there is a massive opportunity for us to work together to build better universities and to agree that we're kind of greater than the sum of our parts when it comes to estates, companies like PTS, and the Smart Campus, which hopefully somebody will give it a new name in the next couple of months or years, because it's got a bit old. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tim.
I have a question. I've got a microphone on if the guys just want to stick me up. Predominantly for Tim.
Yep.
You said that estates and yourselves approached PTS together. Who at the university approached who first, though? Was it information services that approached estates, or was it estates that approached Information
Yeah,
Services?
so the University of Birmingham, not by design, employed a head of innovation in IT and a head of innovation in estates completely independently of each other, because we don't talk, right? That makes sense. My counterpart, Matt Beveridge, who couldn't be here today, comes from a similar kind of academic background to myself. We joined at the same time. Ultimately, we've had a very diverse capital program, which has become kind of digital by default, because buildings are digital by default now, and they approached PTS originally. I think very quickly, PTS bringing that kind of perspective that Mark talked about in terms of data and joining those things together, made it very clear that both people needed to be at the room at the same time.
Yeah.
The fact that we just employed 2 relatively senior members of both teams to focus on innovation was just lucky.
Thanks. Nothing else?